Okay, hello. Welcome to our Saturday show. I'll be your host today, physiologist, but you can call me Michael. I have with me Kevin and Nicholas. We're going to talk about Polish politics. We have presidential elections here. Nicholas knows something about Polish politics. Kevin knows nothing, so he's a good stand-in for the audience. Well, we should perhaps start with Nicholas telling us about his Polish connection.
Sure, happy to, and thanks for having me on. It's good to be on another episode of the Traditionalists. So, I mean, my connection to Poland is twofold. Most importantly, I'm married to a Polish woman. Her family defected from communist Poland to Canada in 1986. Well, they had a one-year stay in a refugee camp in Italy, which sounded like it was a pretty nice experience actually, because it was one of Mussolini's old villas that had been repurposed to a refugee camp for people fleeing from communism. But I have some family background as well. My grandmother was Polish on my dad's side, my dad's mom. So Poland and Polish history has always been an interest to me, and the Polish wife and Polish in-laws, I've come to follow Polish politics a little bit from afar, obviously, and in a casual manner, since it doesn't directly impact me. It might impact me if things continue to go the trajectory they're on in Canada, and we get serious about maybe relocating.
Okay. And, well, Kevin, you do have a connection to Poland. You live on the same continent.
It's true. Yeah. So I know kind of Polish politics by rumor almost. So I hear that it's more conservative. I hear that it's a country that's kind of John Paul II Catholic. So you have this conservatism, whatnot. I know a guy who's running, Gregor Brown, I think is his name. And he's someone that I know a little bit about because he produced a documentary about Martin Luther probably 10 years ago now. That's fantastic. Really, really fantastic documentary exposing Martin Luther. I think it's called Martin Luther and the Protestant Revolution. Make sure it's not Reformation, the Protestant Revolution. It's highly, highly recommendable. And apparently he was running in this. So that automatically made me a little more interested. It's like, oh, okay. Here's a guy who I really respect for something he created. And he's apparently a politician. But that's about my level of knowledge in Polish politics. Pretty much zero. So tell me any other name. Don't ask me to pronounce any of the Polish names or anything like that. That's why we have Michael here to describe a little bit what's going on. But we've done shows on Traditionalists and on Catholic Family Podcast in the past about politics in Britain, politics in Germany, and I think it's a good and helpful thing, especially honestly for Americans who I think really get kind of really caught up and focused on just politics in America, and kind of realize, hey, that it's a bigger world, and kind of understand a little bit about what's going on elsewhere. And so I'm glad that we're doing this.
Yes, we are doing this, and I am going to make you pronounce the names.
It's getting ugly.
Yes, well, Mr. Brown is no longer running because our election is in 2 rounds. We had the first round, it ended last Sunday, and we have the next round in 2 weeks. So, the next Sunday. Well, the point is to get over 50%. In the first round, no one really gets it. So the 2 strongest candidates graduate to the second round, where they fight for final victory. And Mr. Brown did very well. I will later describe his full situation. But our two main candidates right now are for the, let's say, vaguely right-wing or vaguely patriotic Mr. Karol Nawrocki. Nawrocki, that's a simple name.
Nawrocki, okay.
Yes, and the and the, let's say, vaguely left-wing or vaguely globalist candidate with a beautiful Polish last name, Rafał Trzaskowski.
Papa
Well,
Tchaikovsky.
we should
Nice.
maybe back up a little bit and give viewers just a little bit of an overview of the parties that these people are affiliated with. And this is what I find interesting as a Canadian, because, I mean, there's parties in Poland that have actually similar platforms to a party in Canada. And in Canada, that party are considered like they're literally called Nazis, racists. No one votes for them. They're complete outcasts. Whereas in Poland, they're part of a coalition with that globalist or slightly globalist, well, the party that Trzaskowski is affiliated with. So I'll give you my perspective as a Canadian, and you can maybe say your perspective on these parties as a Polish person, because it's probably a lot different than how they look from the outside, because everything's relative. So I'm looking at them from the perspective in Canada, where everything is extremely globalist. Even the so-called Conservative Party, they're all on board with mass immigration. They're all on board with climate change, and we have to destroy the economy to save the planet, etc. So I guess starting with you mentioned Nawrocki. I think he's running as an independent, but he's actually associated with PiS, which is Prawo I Sprawiedliwość, which is
Very
law and
good.
justice. Poland has very interesting political names. Very few of them are actually called parties. They're just called these. So that's
Yes, that's a part of the degeneration of our system, unfortunately.
right. So
When
law
I
and
say
justice.
when I say degeneration, I mean it's growing closer to the Anglo-Saxon system,
Oh, okay. So
meaning two-party system. But
well, yes, it is. It is heading towards that. Although the saving grace is you, unlike us here, and unlike in the United States, you have proportional representation, so that allows for makes it more viable for all more parties to exist in the big two. But anyway, law and justice, I guess you would describe them as the vaguely patriotic. I mean, they were the government of Poland for what,
eight
about
years,
8 years up until the
8 years
last
this
election.
time, and before that they briefly controlled the government
Right. So
about 20 years ago.
from a North American perspective, they're probably vaguely equivalent to the Republican Party. I mean, they're the
Yes.
main so-called conservative party. I mean, abortion is illegal in Poland under their watch, isn't it?
Well, it's it's
Or
more
very difficult to get.
No, it's actually very simple to get.
Oh, okay. Because over here you hear the news and they're talking about these protests about how
No,
abortion is illegal in
there
Poland.
were
And
there were protests. Yes. Well, our situation was under communism, abortion was legal, and then there was, after, let's say, regaining independence, we had something called the abortion compromise. And the compromise was simple: abortion is going to be illegal except in three cases. One, when it is a result of a criminal activity, like rape. Two, when it is when the pregnancy is a danger to the life and health of the mother. And three, when there is some severe damage or disease to the fetus. And a few years back, at the end of the Law and Justice's rule, our constitutional tribunal did in fact find, quite out of the blue, I might say, the eugenical exception to be unconstitutional. I don't know why it is more unconstitutional than the others, because they decided that, well, Polish constitution guarantees everyone the protection of life, even if they are, let's say, going to be retarded or something like that. I don't know why that exception is more unconstitutional than the others. Others survived. And as we recently found out, there was still under Law and Justice's rule a change in practice. That is, the exception about life and health became interpreted more broadly. Now it's just mental health. So you go to a psychologist gives you a receipt that you need an abortion or else you're going to be severely depressed and it's going to threaten your life. And then you go and you have an abortion. We had recently a monstrous case when a child was butchered in the 9th month of the pregnancy. So it was the last month, cesarean section, or whatever you call it. And the woman is cut open, the baby still in the womb is injected with poison straight to the heart. It has to be done still in the womb, because if you remove the baby, you move it
Now it's
30
not
centimeters outside of the body of the mother, it's going to be a murder. When the baby is still in the womb, it's a medical procedure.
Okay, so it's not as good as again, see, this is the differences between when you're on this side of the ocean and you just see some news articles, people are outraged about how hard it is to get it. I mean, compared to Canada, it's probably still a lot harder to get an abortion in Poland than in Canada, but it's not exactly outlawed. But anyway, so that's law and justice. I mean, economically, they're probably way more socialist than
they are
any
fairly
conservative
openly
party over
socialist.
there.
They are fairly openly socialist. The
Right,
Prime
but
Minister.
they're at least ostensibly not in favor of the mass immigration and Europe
Oh,
flooding.
they are. They were caught in a scandal when they are the party which imported most migrants out of all the
Okay.
parties.
Well,
All the
I mean, they're
government.
like I say ostensibly, they talk a good game. They're like, what's her name, Meloni in Italy, that everyone was losing their minds over. Oh, she's so based. And then she sets new records for the number of immigrants from Africa to Italy. So, they're the fake conservative party in Poland.
Yeah,
We could probably call
well,
them that. Most people would probably consider peace or law and justice. Oh, that's who you vote for if you're more conservative in Poland. But
yes,
you're respectable, right? You're not going to go.
right.
We'll talk the non-respectable parties
They
after. So
like to show themselves with Polish flags, with all the patriotic phrases and all the symbols, and they like to get photographed in church, and they are very cozy with the Novus Ordo hierarchy. And it was another scandal when one of the archbishops during COVID introduced the prime minister and the minister of health whose names were Matthew and Luke. So he introduced them as our evangelists.
oh, so right. So anyway, and now when we show graphs later, peace or law and justice, they're blue, which might be weird for Americans, but for Canadians that's normal because that's what the Conservative Party in Canada is blue. The left are usually red, which makes more sense to me than. But anyway,
Same in Germany, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so law and justice, and then Trzaskowski, he's actually a member of Platforma Obywatelska, which I think is well. Whenever I see it translated, civic platform, but I think you said it could also be citizens platform.
There is absolutely no difference between the two in Polish.
Okay.
It's
So,
it's the exact same. There's no distinction. I think a lot of those names were translated 20, 25 years ago by some intern because he was the only person who knew English somewhat. So
maybe.
that's
So,
how he could translate.
So, I mean, Civic Platform, they would be roughly the equivalent of the Democrats. I mean, they're the
Yes.
left of center mainstream
Yes.
party, but I mean, you look at their policies, at least again from afar, looking at their policies, they're well to the right of the Conservative Party of Canada.
Yes. Truth be told, the two parties are completely indistinct. Well, not completely, but they are very similar in practice. And in fact, 20 years ago, they started as a coalition. They wanted to form a government together. Unfortunately, so they were very close to each other, very openly. They were both regarded as right-wing parties at some point, 20 years ago. Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, they had a massive disagreement about how they're going to split the ministries between themselves. And that's when Law and Justice formed a coalition with someone else, with two other parties, and they've hated each other ever since.
Well,
So
and,
the conflict between them is really a personal conflict that's 20 years old, which sort of the ideology got super added to that.
so it sounds like Poland's pretty much got the uniparty system that we have everywhere else in the West, where you have two parties that are functionally the same, but they talk a little bit different in front of the media and pretend to be different and have these fake arguments, but in reality, when they're actually in power, their policies are nearly indistinguishable.
Yes, well, that's the optimal strategy in a democracy. That's not necessarily a nefarious plot. I mean, there's plenty of nefarious plots to keep it that way, but it is the most expedient way to organize politics. You have one party which, organizes people around the rhetoric of patriotism, conservatism, being responsible, take care of your family, think about your country, your duty to God and fellow men, and the other party which says, well, we're open, we're welcoming, we're progressive, but their policies don't really matter that much. Well, of course, the civic platform is, I would say, the rule of the civic platform now, because this is the party in power really, is worse than the corrupt government of Law and Justice before it, which was worse than the corrupt government of civic platform before that, which was worse than the corrupt government of Law and Justice. They've been switching places for 20 years. And
Yeah, I mean that's the typical in liberal democracies, but
and they are escalating their little war. They are.
well, that's happening everywhere. I mean, I would say things are escalating between the Republicans and Democrats. Things are escalating between the conservatives and the liberals
Yes,
in Canada, but it's all this.
But the Republicans and Democrats are very old parties. Republicans are younger. They are what? 150 years? More than
Something
that,
like
I
that,
think. 170, something like that. So those are old parties. Law and Justice and Civic Platform are less than 30 years, and they started really as two groups which were very close to each other. So
Yeah.
within this lifetime, their leaders simply had to a large degree, a very personal disagreement, and their
Right.
personal hatred escalates. This is a war of two groups, not really out of any ideology, but for the control of the, let's say, semi-feudal state apparatus, where you can just put your friends and family in position of power and
Okay.
and just suck enough money out of the state.
Right. So those are the two main parties. Just to go quickly, there's a couple others of somewhat note. I guess the bigger of the smaller parties. I guess there's Levica, which literally means the left. You can guess what they're all about. I don't think we need to talk too much about them. They're a
I
bit
think we
they're
do,
around-
because there are a few versions of the left party.
I'll be right back, guys. My computer says it's dying. It's plugged in, but it must be a bad plug. I'll be right back.
Okay. So there are a few versions of the left. There's the. You know what?
I don't know,
This is
maybe
a bit embarrassing, but I don't remember all their names. But there's the sort of mainstream left, which is in the governing coalition. There's the anti-system left, which is outside of that.
right. Oh well, I've actually Do we want to wait until Kevin's sorted out and we can re-edit this?
No, but I think I should mute him for a moment. Okay, he's muted.
Well, let's just look up good old Wikipedia's list of all the parties. So
Yes.
under Civic Platform, they've got Civic Coalition, and these would be the more, I guess, full
Originally,
establishment left parties that are in here, like this Nowoczesna and Inicjativa Polska, and of course, you've always got to have the Watermelon Party, the Greens,
Right.
who are green on the outside, red on the inside.
yeah, but they don't really matter. Of those, only Civic Platform is still in play, so to speak. Original difference between Civic Platform and Law and Justice was that Civic Platform was supposed to be more economically liberal and socially conservative, vaguely. So they were supposed to be the center-right party, and Law and Justice was supposed to be, let's say, more hard-right. But the Civic Platform drifted to the left and got rid of its more right-wing members. Occasionally they pay lip service to more liberal economy, but they have become the party of, the nice progressive group of the people who really, I've seen during Brexit in England people who young people who had tears in their eyes. No, Europe, we don't want to leave you. We love you. We love you. We don't want to go. Those are the people who vote for Civic Platform now.
Right.
The sort of people who have emotional attachment to progress and the EU.
Right. So Civic Coalition, they've got these fairly negligible parties that are joined with them. But
Yeah.
then, who is
Yes.
but they're not they don't have a majority. So who is propping up their government? I guess Third Way, because I know
If you could
ASL,
scroll up for a
people-
moment. Right, now we have the New Left. That's the mainstream leftist party, which is small. They got 5%, less than 5% in this election, or their candidate.
Right.
They are the ordinary left, which says, we really need abortion, we really need to fight the church, we need the separation of church and state, like we don't have it. Although I can somewhat understand their annoyance, since the Novus Ordo hierarchy was very cozy with the former government, so they sort of brought it up on themselves. And a little lower we have Razem, so Together party, and exactly the same left wing, except led by Adrian Zandberg, and that left is not in the coalition. That's Zandberg accused the mainstream left candidate of essentially selling out to the coalition and not fulfilling any of their promises to their constituency, which is true. This is part of the two-party system we have now. We have the main center-left party, Civic Platform, blackmailing all the other parties essentially all the other parties left of peace, left of law and justice, and saying, well, you must support us, or else law and justice will rule, and then the world will end, and Poland will die, and something horrible will happen.
So these third parties here, like Poland 2050 and the Polish People's Party, which I just found them interesting because I compared their platform to the Canadian People's Party, and their platform is almost identical. So that goes back to what I was talking about. Because in Canada, the People's Party of Canada, they're called Nazis, they're racists, they're considered this extremist party, which I find hilarious. But then you see a part in Poland, given differences in culture, a party that at least outwardly has the same policies. They're in a coalition with the center-left government
Yes.
versus being pariahs, like a party with those
One
policies in
point
Canada are.
about their name. This is probably the worst translation of the name. This is, first of all, this is not Polish People's Party, contrary to how they translated it. It's the Polish Party of the People.
Okay.
So it's not. That's where the adjective goes, and the people here refers specifically to people working in agriculture. So it's not just party of all people in Poland. It's
So it's the farmer party, basically.
yes, it's the farmer party.
Oh,
It
okay.
was normally had support in the country and in small towns, and it is the oldest party. It
Yeah,
is
they've been around since in
in
one
one
form or
form or
another
other.
since
Yes.
1895. But okay, well, let's skip to the good.
Let's stay with them for a moment
Oh,
more,
okay,
because
I wanted to skip to the good stuff, but
well, they sort of are the good stuff, because they have existed in a different form under communism, and they exist now, and they existed before the war. So they are a very old party, and because they are not really ideological. They are not ideological, and they are not centered around a charismatic leader. They are centered around providing for the interests of their voters, of people, of small-time government officials, municipal officials, for farmers, for people like that. So it is a big, maybe not surprise, but it is something odd that they were unable to form a coalition with Law and Justice in the last election, because normally they would be able to form a coalition with everyone. But this is entirely the fault of Law and Justice, which tries to blackmail all the parties to its right to join it and surrender and essentially become vassals, and then it essentially devours them.
well, it sounds like the same tactic being used by both Peace and PAO. Just
Yes,
they
they
bully
do.
different people to.
Yes, they do exactly the same thing, and they support each other in this system. For all their posture of hatred towards each other, they will defend their monopolies on their respective sides. For example, during the previous presidential elections, the candidate of the civic platform was losing completely, was going to just fall out of the race. At which point, Law and Justice, which was still in power, voted to allow them to change a candidate for a better one, who would get more votes. So they are actively supporting this transformation into a two-party system, and they are very vulgarly bullying other parties to submit to their hegemony. So Polish People's Party is it was a party which was in coalition with plenty of governments, because they just want to do good business, and the ideology is there because, well, they had to write something down, but they are there to provide for the interests of their people. Okay, you can scroll down now.
Yeah, this is the most interesting group for me is Confederation, or Konfederacja in Polish,
Yes.
Confederation of Liberty and Independence, and so there's a few groups underneath them. I find New Hope is kind of a hilarious name to me,
Yes.
but then you've got Ruch Narodowy, or the National Movement, which I mean they're described as far right, but I know you were saying that they're not. They're going more moderate. But then we're mentioning Grzegorz Braun, which, despite his German last name, is definitely Polish, and he's his party within this
his
coalition.
family was German. I don't know
Yeah.
how
So he's
many I think it's well over a century since they've been absorbed into Poland.
Right. Right, so yeah, his smaller party is the Confederacja Korony Polskiej, or the Confederation of the Polish Crown. So, I mean, he is a traditional Catholic. I don't know where he goes if he's.
I believe he goes to the SSPX. He certainly spoke very, very
like it.
fondly of them.
Yeah, I've heard him say something. I know I know when he came to Canada, not this recent election, but a previous election, he came to Canada to seek votes from the Polish diaspora, and I think it was a lot of SSPX churches were hosting him when he was coming to speak. I know for sure the SSPX church in Toronto had him, so he's. I mean, to me, from the outside, he seems like he's the real deal ideologically. I mean, he is a little bit can be a bit provocative. I want to share a because I downloaded it.
Wait with that. We'll get to that. But I want to focus on the three, let's say, parties here, or three groups which form the Confederation, Liberty and Independence, because those are what I would regard as the genuine right wing in Poland. And I, to some degree, identify with that group, so I want to talk about its history. It was composed of the two groups, originally composed of the two groups one of them were the nationalists, so the Ruch Narodowy and those circles. The others were, let's say, liberals, or people who called themselves liberals under communism, and when communism fell, they had to find themselves a new name because suddenly they were exposed to Western liberals, and they decided, well, we're not with those guys. So they became known as the conservative liberals. And Grzegorz Braun was a linchpin uniting the coalition of the two groups, because he was to some degree a bridge between them. He's very libertarian minded in many respects. That's something which I don't think gets broadcast west, where he is known mostly for, let's say, the provocative actions, like well, we'll get to that. But I remember years ago where he was in a discussion, very vivid discussion, with then head of the national movement, and he called him a fascist or a Mussolinist for wanting to keep public education. So he was very... So he is very much for free market, minimal state, strong but minimal state. And I have to speak about the conservative... Of course, the funny thing is the right wing in Poland generally is very free market, because the nationalists are not as much pro-free market, but they certainly have free market roots. The great antebellum free market economists were nationalists in Poland. So that's sort of what makes you right-wing in Poland to a large degree, is that you, to some degree, accept the free market. And the conservative liberals, as they are called, it's completely inadequate name. Were headed, I suppose, are centered around the person of Janusz Korwin-Mikke, who's also very provocative. I think I had a photo of him somewhere here. Let me share it. Well, what makes That's him, Janusz Korwin-Mikke. He's in politics, he's been in politics for 60 years, since his university days. And when you hear things I say, and you may think, well, they are a bit outlandish, you never heard something like that. That's largely because I learned it from him. So he formulated the adage that the communism in Poland, the communist Poland, was composed of two elements: socialism and authoritarianism. And we removed authoritarianism and tried to keep socialism. We should have done it the other way around. Kept the old authoritarian system and just put laissez-faire economy in. And you know, he's a monarchist, opposed to abortion. His idea was that the best thing to, you know, to privatize everything and have free market economy and private healthcare, private schooling, and so on. Except he wanted the military to launch coup d'etat, and the military should do it and kill all the communists. So that's more or less his position, and the position of the so-called conservative liberals in Poland. He's the reason we don't really have libertarians here, because he took the whole liberty movement, and libertarians kept complaining for years that he's scandalous and he's an authoritarian, which he of course is.
I mean, the thing is, libertarians don't really exist anywhere, because true libertarianism, I think, is just not workable. I mean, you've got there aren't really. You've got some small fringe groups. There's a Libertarian Party in Canada. There's a Libertarian Party in the U.S., but they never really go anywhere.
Well, but we don't have I think we have a Libertarian Party, perhaps, but it's like 5 people. You can't really have a Libertarian Party convention in Poland because the liberty movement has been taken over by Korwin-Mikke. There are a few interviews with him in the West in English. Unfortunately, they are not about deep ideological stuff. They are about him saying in the EU that, you know, he commented on the wage gap. And he said, well, of course women earn less. They are smaller, weaker, and less intelligent. They must earn less. So that was his position. He got interviewed a few times over that. You say that libertarianism is not workable. In a sense, it is. It's just there are 2 camps in the libertarian movement. One is essentially neo-feudalist, and it's centered around Hans Hermann Hoppe. Those people want something perfectly workable. They want to return to the decentralization of the Middle Ages, where everything was based on private contracts between feudal lords and their vassals. They wanted a decentralized, something like the Holy Roman Empire when it got shattered and the imperial power diminished. So that's workable. We had it. And then there are those libertarians who just sort of imagine a utopia.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking of, the anarcho-capitalists who think if you just have no government at all, then that's the which it'll never happen because someone's always going to step in and take over.
Well, that's the problem with some of them. You always have a government, even if it's a government of feudal lords or the government of fathers of families or judges or patriarchs. You can have it without the state in its modern understanding, but then the power is just absorbed by some sort of aristocracy. And Hoppe, as far as I know, is very much explicit that he wants the natural aristocracy to take over.
Yeah.
So
Well,
enough about them.
yeah, we're.
What?
I'm just looking at the time. We barely talked about the presidential election itself, so we should
Yes,
probably
yes.
head over that, having given a review overview of the parties involved.
Well, I think we need to mention that Corvin Mikke retired, and the uh, conservative liberal movement was taken over by his former pupil Sławomir Mencen, who ran in these elections. Uh, he
Yeah,
got a very good,
he did quite well.
very good score,
Yeah,
and Brown split from them and ran independently. So there was a split between the national movement and New Hope, which is the party of conservative liberals, and Brown. Brown wanted to be more radical, radical economically even. He wants to completely abolish a lot of taxes, the income tax, for example, whilst the New Hope and National Movement want low and simple taxes. They want to simplify everything. But the real difference between them is in sheer radicalism. And that's I think where we can play the video.
well, maybe we'll say. I don't know if we'll do. I think we should talk about the actual what's going on in the election. So
Okay.
I found this graphic, which shows the results of round one of the
Yes.
election. So as you can see, orange is Shashkovsky, blue is Navratsky, and then you don't really see the other colors because they didn't get enough votes. But you can see Slavomir Mencen, who we're mentioning, he did quite well for not being one part of the Uniparty,
Yes.
14.8%, almost 15%. And then
15% in practice.
right, and then behind him in fourth place was Grzegorz Braun
Yes.
with he's 6.34%.
Yes.
And then, I mean, Mr. Zandberg, who you mentioned, he had almost
Yes.
5%.
He's much. I don't know if he's really more radical than the mainstream left, but he is far. Well, he didn't join the coalition. He didn't sell out for a nice office. He's a real believer. And in the meantime, we have Szymon Hołownia with 499. He's the candidate of the coalition of Poland 2050 and Polish People's Party.
Isn't he the Marshal of the Sejm, which would be like our version of the Speaker of the House?
Yes, he is. Well, for half of the term, he's going to switch with the head of the mainstream left, Włodzimierz Czarzasty. Czarzasty he was the member of the Communist Party under communism, so he's an old school communist.
He's got to be not just old school, but pretty old, because I mean it's been a few years since communism. It was '89 that communism
89,
collapsed
yes.
in Poland. So it's a few years ago now.
Yes,
35 years.
I think he's one of the last, or perhaps he is the last big names from those times who actually are still politically active.
Just a real quick comment on the map, because I wonder if this is the same in Canada, because in the U.S. you look at the maps and you see conservative Republican, domination throughout the country, except for in the cities, right? So you always see that the Democrat, voted in the big cities, Denver, Los Angeles, etc. This is a much interesting map because it's looks like it's very regional. It's split like down the half of the map, which is that's pretty fascinating. I don't know if is there a quick explanation for that, Michael, or why is it that you have, the southeast is blue and the northwest is orange? That's kind of fascinating.
there is an explanation, but it isn't quick. I mean, the quick explanation is that the orange parts are the parts which were at some point under German control, German occupation. And they constitute, well, it's a whole history of those territories and how they were changing hands between Poland and Germany. And that's too long, I think. But those parts in orange are largely the parts either gained or regained, or however you want to look at it, by Poland after the Second World War. And again, some of those territories were, I think all of them were at some point in history under Polish control. It's just the very western parts were under Polish control about 800 years ago, and then they've been German for 800 years.
Yeah, that probably is an important thing to point out that most people might not know is Poland's borders shifted several hundred kilometers westward after World War II, because at the beginning
Yes, on both ends.
Right, before World War II, the border between Germany and Poland would have been somewhere around here, and then
Yes.
the Polish-Russian border would have been back over here. So
Yes.
large sections of what are now Ukraine and Belarus were
Ukraine,
Poland.
Belarus, Lithuania. I mean, it's some Poland, I don't know if I can't find quickly the map of Poland at its greatest extent, but it was a massive country which mostly moved east. The parts which are in the west have been lost to Germany. I think some of them 1,000 years ago, and just Poland sort of lost interest in them and moved its interest to the east. So that's part of it. The parts which are in the orange have been under German control, but as we've been discussing,
I found a map that I think we can share from Wikipedia that gives a bit of that Polish borders as they've changed over the last
yes, you can see
last 1,000 years or
Latvia
so.
and part of
So you can see
Estonia,
all of this back in
Yes.
you can see 1569. The Polish borders are all the way out here.
At some
then-
point, Poland was essentially touching the sea on the other side,
Right. So you can see, so the pink
almost
here,
to
that's modern.
Crimea.
The pink here is modern Poland, but the dark, this gray line here, that 1939, you can see this was Poland right before World War II started.
Interesting.
Right. But as we've been discussing with Nicholas, I don't think that is, strictly speaking, the explanation for the difference. After World War II, west of Poland, those territories which were formerly German, is where where most Soviet armies were stationed, and where Soviets were building a lot of things, including hospitals. I think there's also a map of distribution of hospitals in Poland. You have much more of them in the west, and the simple answer is that the Soviet system was a system of perpetual war, perpetual revolution. So they stationed all the armies and built a lot of hospitals in the west, essentially in preparation to attack if they need.
Right. Yeah. So this is just a map I found quickly. You can definitely see, yeah, there's quite a few more. Which, I mean, it makes sense that the Soviets would have the bulk of their forces deployed to the west of the country because that's where it's closest to NATO.
Yes.
But then this is all where all these Soviet bases are. That's all area that.
Allow
before-
me to share a different map. I think mine is a little bit better. Yes, as you can see, this is more or less the same map. Where the Soviet army was stationed.
Interesting.
So I think that is, to some degree, the reason why those places are more, let's say, progressive, uh, because between the world wars, places which were formerly under German occupation were really the domain of nationalists. That's where the nationalists were stronger, because nationalists did a tremendous amount of work to go there and, when they were faced with Kulturkampf, persuade people that, you look at the parish records, your family was 3 or 4 generations ago, they were Poles, returned to Polish culture. And that's where nationalists did a lot of work. And nationalists absolutely hated, well, maybe not hated, but they had no hope for the east of Poland. Because in the east of Poland, where I'm from, and where I would say was the real beating heart of Poland, the population was more split. You had cities which were Polish, and they were surrounded by villages which were Ukrainian or Lithuanian or Belarusian. So nationalists essentially believed before the war that you have to cut off those territories. They are a cancer. That was their fault for being Democrats, because they were national Democrats, and they believed that, well, you have a lot of Ukrainians and Lithuanians, they're not going to vote for a Polish nationalistic party. Very true. Those people simply shouldn't have had the vote.
So is that still the case then? Do you still have?
No, because those
But
territories
it
were
looks like
cut
now
off.
in the east, it's going. The
Poland's
east is
all
voting
Polish.
more
East has been
right
cut off.
now, right?
When I'm talking about east of Poland before the war, and historically, I'm talking about Kiev, Leopolis or Lviv, Minsk, which is the capital of Belarus, Vilnius, Kovno, so cities which are now in Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine. Poland has been essentially moved to the west by Stalin on both sides.
Yeah,
And the
so but of
population
course you do
moved to
still have
the
the
degree.
little islands of orange in the blue areas for the
Yes,
cities.
which are the big cities.
Yeah, so they still have that the city. I've still never really been able to figure out, like, why are cities always liberal? Is there such a thing as a
It's very
traditionalist?
simple. It's very simple.
Hmm.
You can't really do all their weird liberal sexual stuff in a small town.
Oh, so they all congregate in the big cities.
Yeah, so they have to, and that's where all the big corporations are. That's where all the
Globalist.
government offices are. That's
I,
where
I
all the
would,
universities.
I would also say, I think part of it's education. Exactly. I think my biggest part of it is education. I would say this is where people who go to university, go to college to get educated, they rarely go back out into the country. And I see that where I live. I mean, I live in the middle of nowhere. And you have a lot of hand workers, in tourism, but, more kind of simple folk, I suppose you could say, and they're much more conservative. And I think a huge part of liberalism, whatever you want to call it, is education. The people are brainwashed into reading whatever it is. If it's Karl Marx or whatever it is in college, and I think a lot of people come out of university totally,
But
literally
notice-
brainwashed. I mean, really on the
notice
other
that
side
it
of
has
what they
always
could have been.
like that. Notice it has
Sure.
always been like that. What does the word pagan mean? Pagan means a villager, someone from a village. That's how the name got stuck, because they were the last conservative bastions of paganism. The countryside, the simple people, whilst all the cities became Catholic. So we sort of need to get back to that. Cities will always be centers of culture. that we are doing better in the countryside and liberals are doing better in the cities is nothing against the city life. This is a criticism of us, that we are degenerating. We cannot form our own strong culture. But
Yeah, well, I don't think I think there's no way that we can without the church. And I mean, the church the shepherd has been struck and the flock is scattered. We don't have that unifying principle, and
but
we're a
that's been a
tiny
problem long before the Vatican II.
Oh, well, of course. The Vatican II didn't come out of.
Right,
These
so
things don't happen out of the blue.
we first lost the grip of culture and then Vatican II happened. I would say we also lost the grip of economy with the end of feudalism and in colonies of slavery. I'm sorry for laughing, but I just realized I mentioned slavery in every one of our streams and programs. And in the last one, someone wrote to me after it that congratulations on lasting this long without mentioning slavery. So, so
What you made it 58 minutes or 56 minutes before mentioning
yes,
it this stream.
but with the fall of feudalism and slavery in the colonies, people became equal as a matter of law. And when you have equality in practice, egalitarianism in theory needs to follow. You can't long have equality in practice and believe in inequality in theory.
Yeah.
So this is.
So let me show one other thing. I'm wondering, does a graphic like this give you a bit of hope for the future of Poland? This is exit poll. Now, of course, it's exit polls. Who knows how people actually voted? But this is what people are saying to the pollsters coming out.
The exit polls were fairly accurate, so
I find it
it should be
interesting
good.
that it seems like most of Menson's votes came from the under 39 crowd. Grzegorz Braun did best with the 30 to 39 people, not as well. Greg Braun is more kind of equal across age groups. But I find that interesting. I find this interesting too, that in Poland the 60 plus vote is the more right of center party, and well, I mean they're almost equal. But whereas in Canada it's definitely the reverse, and I suspect it's the same in the U.S. where the 60 plus tend to be more left. But does this give you hope for the future of Poland?
It gives me hope for the future of the right-wing movement in Poland. I don't know how much hope I have for that movement really changing the country. I think European nations are moribund. They got to the end of their life cycle and they will all die out or will be changed substantially. So I think
probably the caliphate eventually.
Possibly, although more likely in Germany or England than in Poland.
Yeah, I was thinking Europe generally, but if Western Europe becomes the caliphate, it won't be long before you've got jihad on the roll again. We just haven't had a big jihad for a while because the Muslim world fell so far behind the West technologically that when they're still fighting just with AK-47s and T-72s, and the West has all these.
They're going to take over now.
But yeah, so once they have that stuff, they take over Britain.
And it has to be said about Islam. It does produce golden ages after it conquers a more advanced society. They don't just burn all the books. They take over. It happened when they conquered Persia. That's the Islamic golden age. It wasn't just a bunch of Arabs who suddenly had brilliant ideas. They conquered Persia. They stole its ideas. They absorbed the population. They took inventions from India, from Egypt, and then they spread it around. And then, when they had nothing more to take over, they gradually declined. But now they're going to take over the West, and you will see, I think, an Islamic golden age where they will impose a regime which is more similar to the natural law, closer to the natural law than postmodernism. And they will take over the technology.
Yeah, I agree. It would be closer to the natural law, but ironically, people like us would. We at least don't get dragged into the street and murdered or thrown off buildings, and our sons don't get abducted. Well, they try to. I guess they do their own version of janissaries in the modern West. It's just more subtle with the brainwashing and soya and all the food and chemicals in the environment.
I think the Islamic migration should force the healthy elements of Western populations which are dispersed to flee their homes and concentrate in one place, or not necessarily from all Europe in one place, but let's say from all Britain in one place, from all Slavic country, from all Germanic countries, and concentrate tightly. And this pressure should form like pressure transforming coal into diamonds. This pressure of migration should burn away the diseased elements of Western populations and allow the healthier elements to refocus and survive and be the seed of new European nations.
Well, I can definitely see the merit in that analysis, and that seems to be the way humans work. We need to. That's why God chastises those who He loves, because you see it throughout history.
Yes,
Humans
but
need
we
to be
also completely
chastised in order
changed
to
the
stay on the
subject.
right path.
Yes, but we also completely changed the subject. We need to get back to Poland.
We did, although I'm personally running out of time that I can stick around. But
Okay.
Kevin is there.
So
I got about 5 to 10 minutes.
okay, so let's play that video
Okay.
and talk about that and finish up.
Sure. So this is a video of Greg Braun.
Which made him somewhat famous in the West.
Somewhat famous? Yeah. Let me...
It's happening in Polish Parliament.
Sorry, it doesn't want to play for me. Let me try the different... Sorry, let me try the different viewer. I don't know why that's not... Of course, I had it all queued up, and then it doesn't want to play for me.
Well, it happens. Well, what happened was a group of... Well, we have the left and the progressives, the civic platform always telling us that Polish parliament needs to be a space free from religion, neutral, ideologically and religiously neutral. And then they started celebrating Hanukkah there.
Right,
Invited a group of Chabad Lubavitch and started lighting up the Hanukkah candles.
Which is a fire hazard, so Mr. Braun took action.
Yes.
Panie pośle, co pan robi? Panie pośle, co pan robi?
Well, so he got rid of the fire hazard.
He did.
he's done a few of things like that. Now, some people were scandalized. I will say I'd be scandalized if he went into a synagogue or someone's private home. This was or even some sort of rented room in the building of the Polish parliament. But this was happening in the corridor. And those people tell us that, well, we need to remove crosses because it needs to be religiously neutral. And then they start something like this. There are about 5,000 Jews in Poland, I think. They are not all members of Chabad Lubavitch, the group which organized that. So why exactly is this happening? And that's, of course, very good. I completely support those actions. You need to sometimes respond to provocations with force, and that's the reason why I think we don't have a problem, such a big problem with migrants in Poland, as, for example, England does. About 10 years ago, over 10 years ago, in England, an English soldier named Lee Rigby got butchered in the street by, I think, Nigerian migrants. They just took meat cleavers and hacked him to bits in front of the crowd. And the English people just stood and watched. And then they recorded a video on their phones of the killer with blood on his hands and the cleaver in his hand, explaining why he did that. And after that, the English authorities warned British soldiers not to walk the streets in their uniforms, because they may be attacked.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I mean, that's the way it is here in Canada too. Canadian soldiers are not allowed to wear uniforms.
It isn't happening in Poland yet, not because we have less migrants, we do, but the reason is that we are still able to respond to force with force. And the English, unfortunately, I don't want to single them out, but they are an example. I see it very much even on Twitter. They respond to force with an ever more elaborate moral argument for why they deserve to be safe in their homes, or they, respond with using nasty words to describe the migrants or something like that. You respond to force with force, not with an intellectual argument.
I mean, when you said, though, that it's not like you don't have mass immigration, I mean, it's all relative, right? I mean,
it's relative.
Foreign nationals in Poland's population is only 1.2% of the population. It's not like Canada, where something like, actually, let me see, I think I've got the graphic here somewhere. Like the percentage of the Canadian population that's foreign-born is like 40% or something like that. So that's different than a huge difference from 1.2%.
This isn't in itself a problem. Saudi Arabia, I think, has similar numbers. About 40% are foreign-born. United Arab Emirates, I think, are only 8% are native-born. But those countries are not screaming about being replaced because they don't have democracy. They don't give those people rights, and they are fully capable of responding to force with force.
But their immigrants are also all fellow Arabs and fellow Muslims, aren't they? I mean, it's not like they have 80% of their population is white people.
Let me give you another example. South Carolina in the 1850s. That was a country which had very high black immigration. I'll leave it unspecified. But they had about 60% of the population of South Carolina were black. The native population was a minority. It was similar, I think, in Alabama. Texas, I think, had over 30% immigrants. Those people were not complaining. They were not causing trouble. They were not outvoting the native population. They were not writing complaints and demands for reparations in the press. I leave it unsaid why. But again, immigrants are not a problem in themselves as long as you can keep them in check. The real problems are the equality fanatics.
Well, although I mean,
Well,
I don't know about Germany, but in Canada, I would argue that we're beyond equality. Immigrants have more rights than native-born
Of course,
Canadians.
yeah.
well, that's the natural
Well,
course of history, right? If you will not be masters over them, they will be masters over you.
well, and I think you look at the U.S., the founding of the U.S. The founders said if this country is not run by Christian moral people, it cannot survive. We talked about this last night in our live stream, and it's like I think that's what you're seeing when you have a group of leaders in the U.S., Canada, for sure, likely Poland. They have no impulse. They have no desire to rule for the people. They just don't care. They don't love America. They don't love Americans. They're not doing it for the good. They're not doing it for God. They're doing it probably for their own selfish reasons or whatever it is. And I think that's what you're saying. And I think I agree with you, Michael. I argued with Eric about this a couple weeks ago that this idea that our systems right now work. I'm an optimist, as everyone knows probably, but it doesn't work. I mean, when democracy can be bought, when the pharmaceutical companies can just buy the Congress people, or you know that you vote in someone in Canada who's now going to allow in millions more immigrants who are going to ruin the country, eventually it's going to end up in some sort of revolution, right? It kind of has to, or as you said, it's all going to become a caliphate, and then it's going to become a spiritual war. That's actually I agree. I think that the whole agendas of transgenderism and all this stuff is going to go away within a generation, and it's going to become a religious battle. I totally agree with you there. I think that is where we're headed, and it's probably going to be Catholics, Muslims, and Jews. And it's kind of like, well, that's what we fought for a long time, and I think that's where we're going to be at pretty soon. And I think that talk about being ready to battle down the hatches and fight maybe for our lives, certainly for our faith and culture. And it's getting dark pretty quickly. And I guess I don't know. I got to wrap it up for myself. But I mean, what would then be your feeling, Michael, about how do you feel about this? So let's say 10 you feel great and 1 you feel terrible. Where is your just optimism? Overall, like, how do you feel being a Polish man right now from a 1 to 10? How do you feel, with what happened here in the last week?
5.
That's not very interesting, Michael.
Look,
Very lukewarm.
the simple truth is that, well, que sera, sera. What will happen, will happen. As I said, I think the European nations are on their deathbed, and there's nothing we can do to help them. They will be replaced by something. They will be replaced by younger nations, which will be better. Now, whether those nations will be Mahometan, or whether they will be Christian, I don't know yet. Perhaps I will be dead already. Or perhaps I will be like Saint Augustine, watching the collapse of my civilization. Who knows? I know that ultimately God and nature will triumph.
Amen to that. Nicholas, how do you feel about it? 1 to 10, from the outside-ish.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I'm an outsider, so I don't know that I really have a fully informed opinion. I guess I would say, I mean, if I compare it to the election that Canada just had, but even then, I mean, I'd still only give it a 6 or a 7, because I do agree with what Mihao says. Like, in the grand scheme, it doesn't really matter which side wins. Our countries are all on the way down anyway. It's not like any of these are a Catholic monarchy back on the rise. So, yeah, things could have definitely been worse. It's not bad, but it's not anything to be super
I will
excited.
say one thing. I don't know if the Polish right-wing movement can save Poland in some fashion, but I will say this. It is a very good right-wing movement, and if you are in a Western country, and for example, I don't know, you're like in England where a group of Mahometans are raping your daughter on regular basis, and the police says, well, that's the price you pay for living in a modern society. This is a good place to move to. This is a good place to move to, and this is a good place to learn to be right-wing. We have a good movement, so if you can't live in your country and you want to genuinely become a part of a real right-wing movement, and you don't want to come and bring your values, but you want to learn. You want to learn how to fight the left. This is a good place to move to.
Well, in that case, I'd say if you gentlemen are ready to wrap it up, I am. I gotta run and take a baby.
Absolutely. I think we've exhausted the subject.
Okay.
Well, goodbye, everyone.
Till next time. Maybe we'll talk about Canada again next time. Really positive, really optimistic news about politics. We'll have to come back on with Nicholas sometime.
Well, okay. I don't know what can be optimistic about Canada, but
Not much right now.
next
Gentlemen, I'll
stream
talk to you
will be
later.
pure science fiction. Goodbye.